welcome to another edition of West Side Legacy Stories, an oral history project of Rotary Club of West Springfield. I'm Andra Fleury, a sophomore at West Springfield High School, and with me today we have Joan Rubinwich Asinas. Pleasure to have you.
Correct.
All right, so can you give me your birthday and when you were born?
Yes, I was born September 11, 1939, at Mercy Hospital in Springfield.
How long have you lived in West Springfield?
Ever since I left Mercy Hospital until about 4 years ago, we moved to Connecticut. We now live in Suffield, Connecticut.
What changes have you noticed in the town over the years?
You know, I was thinking about that, and I remember being a little girl trying to ride my bike from Vertigo Street to my grandmother's house on Morton Street. The roads were dirt, they were not paved, and they were full of rocks and holes. And the best thing that ever happened was when the roads got paved. But when I was trying to ride my bike on that awful dirt road, I would have to avoid rocks and holes and hopefully get to my grandmother's house in one piece. But it was interesting, they used to have something come around in the spring and summer that would it almost looked like a snowplow.
Yeah.
And it would scrape the roads and try to get them to be a little bit smoother. But the best thing that I noticed was paved roads. They were awesome. The other thing that I noticed in West Springfield is we have much more diversity now, and we have less open space, less farmland. But I'd really like to expand on the diversity part because we were the only practicing Jewish family living in West Springfield. And I used to walk from Vertigo Street to Mittig School every morning and meet my 3 friends under the tree, and we play double Dutch jump rope. And one day I got to school, and my 3 friends came up to me and said, "We can't play with you anymore because you're a Jew." And
Wow.
That was the first time I learned that words can really hurt your heart. But the thing is, it didn't stop then. It continued. And after I married Dr. Asinas and we had children, this lack of diversity impacted our children because they went to school locally. I don't think I should mention the name of the school, but our oldest daughter would come home crying and saying, "Mom, they were making fun of me today at school. I was called Tokyo Rose." And of course, being Asian American and looking a little bit Asian, the kids took delight in teasing our kids. Then our second daughter came home also upset because she was called, a racial slur. But the thing that really got to me was when our son was coming home on the school bus, somebody that was bigger than him said, "Hey, Mike, I remember Pearl Harbor." And he beat him up, and when he got off the bus, his collar on his shirt was gone, and so was his sleeve. But what really got to me was when I called the principal of the school and told her what happened to all 3 of our children. She did nothing about it.
That's terrible.
It is. So finally, when our youngest son was in 2nd grade, I'd had enough, and I took him out and brought him to Northampton, to Smith College Campus School. There, I found diversity. Everybody was equal. They didn't just celebrate Christmas, they celebrated Christmas, Hanukkah, Diwali, and all the boys and girls were equal, and they were taught that from day one. Go forward several years, and I was now volunteering. I had retired, and I was volunteering at Coburn School in West Springfield. 2nd grade, absolutely loved the kids, and it was a very diverse group. But from day one, the teacher said, "We are all alike." She said, "It doesn't matter if you're fat, if you're skinny. It doesn't matter what language you speak. It doesn't matter how you worship God. We are all the same." And I thought, wonderful. What took so long? Really, that's a long time.
Yeah.
Smith College got it way back. Why didn't our town? But anyway. that was my issue of diversity.
So, what are some of your best memories growing up? Like anything in particular?
Yeah, Vertigo Street was a really great neighborhood to grow up. I love Vertigo Street. I was the only girl. There were a whole bunch of boys, but we always had somebody to play with. We used to play in the road. We'd play softball, rolly at the bat, pick up dodgeball games, climb trees, ride our bikes. But the most fun we had was when we went to the frog pond. It was just a short, a shallow little pond, and we used to jump from one clump of grass to the other.
Yeah. Where was that pond?
On Vertigo Street. It was all part of our neighborhood. We could just get in our little wagons and ride down there or ride our bikes. But the biggest thing was my mother forbid me to go there. And again, I never follow rules. I knew they were meant to be broken. And we used to jump from clump to clump because out in the middle of the pond, that's where the big frogs were.
Ooh.
I fell in one day. I did not want to go home. I was in a lot of trouble, but it didn't stop me from going back. So, and the other nice thing about Vertigo Street and the neighborhood was the moms are mostly stay-at-home moms. And they used to watch out for not just their kids, but all the kids. So you always felt safe and secure in our neighborhood. The other thing about growing up on Vertigo is my grandmother. Again, I was so close to her. She used to say, Joni, go down to Mrs. Sheldon's country store and get me a pack of Lucky Strikes. I mean, you can't do that today. But
No.
I would go to Mrs. Sheldon's store, and after buying my grandma her cigarettes, Mrs. Sheldon was so kind, she'd say, Joni, go over to the candy cabinet and take 2 cents worth of candy.
Aww.
She used to have a little penny candy, corner. And then I would walk home, and you always felt safe in that neighborhood.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
So, what were some like stories that were like in your town, in the town and stuff? What were some stories?
Some stories in the town.
Yeah, some like local legends, perhaps.
I don't think I knew any local legends.
No?
I kept pretty much to myself. And the other thing I remember too, though, is like I mentioned that my grandmother lived on Morton Street. She would call my mother and say, I'm going to take Joni downtown today. We're going to have lunch at Woolworth's. And I thought, okay, I loved it. But she insisted I dress properly. And to her, properly meant a dress, little white socks with the lace around the ankles, patent leather shoes, and of all things, gloves. I have hated gloves all my life, but I had to wear gloves to go with her downtown. And she used to walk holding my hand, and we walked to the bus stop on Westfield Street across from Mrs. Sheldon's little corner shop, get on the bus, go downtown. And my grandmother was poor, and the only thing she could afford was mac and cheese. So we'd go to Woolworth's and get on those little chairs that used to spin around. But sitting next to her eating that mac and cheese, best mac and cheese in the world.
Aww.
She was wonderful company.
What are some other childhood memories that you have?
I have to double check that. Can we?
Yeah.
Like,
what's your earliest memory?
You know what? In the winter time, we used to have they called it the Pine Grove. I don't even think it's there anymore. But when it snowed, we used to all take our sleds and cut through people's yards and go up to the Pine Grove and make our own trails through the pine trees. We had more fun doing that, and there were so many trails. Nobody ever ran into anybody else. It was just a lot of fun. Go home and have hot cocoa after that.
Do you have any siblings, and what were they like growing up?
I am an only child. No siblings. I always wanted some, but
What was that like growing up an only child?
I hated it. I always had to go around and find somebody to play with or drive my mother crazy.
Are there any other childhood stories you'd wish to share?
I don't think I can remember any others. Oh, there was one that my son taught me to me the other night. He says, "Mom, technically, you shouldn't be here." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Mom, weren't you sick?" I said, "Oh, yeah." He says, "You should tell him that story. I had rheumatic fever as a child 3 times." And the doctors back then, I think it was 40s, they gave me 3 pieces of advice. You might live until you're 40. Don't stress your heart. They used to give me notes to get me out of gym, and never have children. I didn't listen to any of them because I just turned 79 last September, and I had 4 children, and I exercise 3 or 4 times a week. I do yoga, Pilates, treadmill, and the bike.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty good for the heart, if anything.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it teaches you sometimes not to listen to advice unless it's sound advice. That's about, I think, all I can remember. Oh, no, there was one other. My father and his garden.
Yeah.
He had the richest, blackest, moist soil. He could grow anything.
Wow.
And I used to love working in the garden with him. He grew carrots, onions, tomatoes, corn,
Sounds good.
but he was famous for his blueberries. He had his blueberry patch, and they were the sweetest, biggest blueberries ever.
Nice. So, were there any childhood nicknames that you had? Like, were you given any growing up?
No, it was usually Joni or Joe.
How would your classmates remember you?
Oh dear. We were just out to dinner with a classmate the other day, and I asked her, I said, "Hope, what was I like when we were hanging out in high school?" She said, "You were naughty." I was always adventurous, looking for trouble, but we had a lot of fun. We used to go out. I was the oldest one. I got my driver's license first. So I would pick up all the friends, and we'd go to Abdow's for their wonderful strawberry pie. And we'd go to A&W for root beer floats. But yeah, I was really the naughty one among the friends.
Are there any other best memories of like grade school, high school, or college?
No, high school was amazing, as you're being in the throes of high school. But growing up in high school in the 50s was absolutely amazing. We had the best music. The 50s music was still awesome, Motown and all that. And we used to go on Friday nights to dances at the Y, wearing our poodle skirts, dating myself, with petticoats. And afterwards, we'd walk up to Friendly's for something to eat, and our parents would pick us up after the dances. And I remember the guys wearing their hair, and they call them ducktails, and they used to roll their cigarette packs in their sleeves, and usually the tough guys would have one tucked behind their ear.
So what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a doctor, but it was the 50s, and my guidance counselor told me that's not an option for women. He said, "You could be a teacher, you can be a secretary. If you really want something in medicine, you could be an x-ray technician, a lab technician, you could be an LPN or an RN." And I thought, well, the RN is the closest that I'm going to get to being a doctor, so I became an RN. I was going to say something else I'm glad that the times have changed, because we have 2 daughters, and we always encourage them to follow their own path. And our oldest daughter is a lawyer. And I have to check my notes because I can't remember her title.
That's fine.
She has her own. She is a lawyer. She is an independent consultant. of regulatory affairs working within the pharmaceutical industry. She is licensed in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and in the federal government to work in the law. Our second daughter is a CPA, certified public accountant, and she works for a big accounting firm in Boston. And her current position is Senior Director of Tax and Treasury. So it's really nice to see how far we've come for opportunities for women.
I agree.
Yes.
So are you still like doing any working? Like, are you volunteering?
Not anymore. Not since we moved to Connecticut.
What types of jobs did you have while working? Like, were there any more memorable than others?
Yes. After I received my RN license, my first job was in Boston at the Peter Bent Brigham Hospital in the operating room. It's now known as Brigham and Women's. And I worked there while my husband was completing his residency. But working at the Brigham gave me the opportunity to work with world famous doctors. Two of them that I remember in particular was a Dr. Dwight Harkin, and he was a renowned heart surgeon, and he did open heart surgery. People came from all over the country to have him operate on them.
Wow.
The other one that I did work with was a Dr. Joseph Murray, and he was a plastic surgeon, and he pioneered organ transplantation.
Nice.
And in 1990, he received the Nobel Prize in medicine.
Wow.
And I worked with him in the operating room.
That's amazing. That's quite an accomplishment. I mean, that's really cool that you got to work beside him.
I got to work with him, and you know what his job was when they transplanted the kidney from one patient to another?
What was it?
He, being a plastic surgeon, he had to suture the tiny blood vessels from the donated kidney to the new recipient.
Wow, that sounds like extreme
That
accuracy.
took a lot of
precision.
skills. But on the other hand, he really wasn't a nice guy. And I'll end it there. But and then the other job I had that I really enjoyed was in Springfield. I worked at Wesson Women's Hospital in labor and delivery. And going to work there every day was like witnessing a miracle when you see a new baby come into the world. But one night, it was really very interesting. A doctor came in and he said to me, "Joan, we're going to be delivering twins shortly." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I went out and I got another baby carrier, brought that in and set it up for twins. And the door opened and they brought the patient in. She was still end stage labor. Mm-hmm. And my job at that point was to take over and after every contraction, listen to the baby's heart rate. So I'm listening, and I found what you did was you would listen and you would make a little mark on her tummy where you heard the heartbeat. Then you'd go around because she was so big, having twins, and you would listen, and I heard the second heartbeat. And I don't know what made me listen in another location, but I picked up another heartbeat. And I thought, he did say twins. So I waited for another contraction, and then I went back and checked, and I checked this side, heart rate was fine. Checked the other side, the heart rate was fine. Then I thought, I want to check that other little third heartbeat I heard. It was still there. Wow. So I paged the doctor and asked him to come in. And I took him aside and I very quietly said, "Doctor, I picked up a third heart rate." And he said, "Don't even joke with me." And I said, No, I'm not joking. Here, I marked on her where I found the heart rate. And he went and he listened. And then he very humbly turned around and said, "Get another carriage." But everything went great. 3 beautiful babies were delivered to a very, very surprised mom.
Oh, that's nice. Any other stories from the hospital?
From the hospital. Not that I would go into at the moment. I think later.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because I was really stuck in surgery in labor and delivery, so I didn't have much opportunity to know the patients when they were awake, because in surgery they were all asleep.
Yeah.
And in labor and delivery, they were very concentrating on what they were doing. So,
Yes.
no.
So, like, what led you to the jobs that you took?
I loved helping people, and I like nursing, especially because it gave you the power to and the knowledge to alleviate pain and suffering in patients.
So, if you could do anything now, like, what would you do and why?
If I could do anything now, and I'm thinking of doing it, is working to make the environment better, get rid of the plastic bags that drive me crazy when I see them coming out of the supermarkets. And actually Sunday I met my goal. I ordered bags from Amazon that you put your produce in, when you go to the market, you put all your produce in plastic bags.
Yeah.
No more. I have bags that you can reuse, they're recycling, you can wash them. So no more plastic is coming into our house, no more plastic bags. I think the environment needs a lot of help.
Okay, Joan, so we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to go to historical periods and family. For our next topic, which is family, we have your husband, Gus, joining us. Gus, it's really good to have you. So, our first question for married people, can you tell us, like, the story of how you both met?
I can tell you, I was a
Yeah.
student operating room technician at the Providence Hospital, and he walked by me in the hallway, and I looked at him and I thought, that's the man I'm going to marry. I knew it immediately. And I went home and I told my father, Dad, I met the man I'm going to marry today. And he said, oh, is he a nice little Jewish boy? And I said, no, Dad, he doesn't really look Jewish. But that's how I met him.
So, do you guys have any children? Like, how many? What were they like?
Yes, we do. We have 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys. They were all good kids.
That's because he wasn't home with them most of the time.
How old are they now?
Oh my, our oldest daughter is 54. Yesterday, our youngest daughter turned 51. Our son is 48, and our youngest son is coming up to 42.
So, what are some, like, classic family stories that you might have?
You know, our kids love the story they loved the most was by Dr. Seuss, The Pale Green Pants with Nobody Inside Them. And we would be having a family dinner, and all of a sudden, one person in the family would say, well, I was walking in the woods and I saw nothing scary. And then the next person would pick up the story. We didn't need the book anymore because they all knew it by heart.
Oh, nice.
It was so much fun. But the other thing that was kind of funny is I decided to join a health food co-op, and our kids are going to eat healthy. Everything was going to be organic. And one day, our children came home. I'll never forget, they were in their St. Thomas uniforms, and there were 4 chocolate bunnies lined up on the counter. And they go, oh, Mom got us chocolate bunnies. Can we eat one? And I said, sure. And they took the cover off, and they took a bite out of the ear, and she goes, oh my God, it's carob. Spit it out. They hated it. They really did. They said, you're always trying to sneak these healthy things into our food. Stop it. So the health food co-op didn't last very long.
See. Is there anything else were there any songs that were very popular in your family?
Songs? No. Just, no. Just
Any?
the story, like, they just loved reading and
Reading?
being read to.
Yeah. What kind of books did they like especially?
Mostly Dr. Seuss. And who is that one? Is it Sidney Sheldon? No, not Sidney Sheldon. I can't remember his name, but they read,
Shel Silverstein?
yes, Shel Silverstein, yes. They liked his books. They liked poetry, but most of all, they stuck with Dr. Seuss. I remember our youngest daughter was about 3, and she decided she was going to read Hop on Pop. She didn't know how to read. And I remember sitting with her in the living room for maybe 3 or 4 hours reading Hop on Pop.
Oh.
She did it. It took hours, but she was determined to do it, and she did it.
So, Gus, were there any stories that you remember or like to share about your kids during their childhood?
Well, I do recall when they were growing up that I made sure that I was able to be of help for their education. So, in my practice, I told my secretary never to uh, do my surgery, schedule my surgery at 8 o'clock, because at 8 o'clock I have to take the kids to school, to the private school. The 2 girls at that time went to McDuffie School. So I did my surgery later on in the morning around 10, 11 o'clock. And also, when they were all growing up, I made sure also that I took them for vacation time. And each year I'll take them to the Philippines to see my family. And they always enjoyed the trip from here over there, although it was a long trip. But the children always liked stopping in Hawaii and enjoying the beaches. And it was just wonderful time that we had when they were growing up.
Tell them about Michael and Dad. Are we up near heaven?
Oh, when I was on the airplane going down on Pacific to Manila, my little young son Michael was fascinated and says, "Dad, that's heaven above there, isn't it?" Yes. And that's the sea down there. Yes. Oh, are we going to heaven? I said, no, not yet, Michael. So it was a funny time, but I enjoyed their company all the time. And they always like being welcome in the Philippines by their relatives, treated like little princesses and prince.
Wow. Gus, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome back to West Springfield Legacy Stories. So, Joan, what were things like in World War II? How did it affect you and your family?
It was interesting. I wasn't too old during World War II, but my mother was an air raid warden. And it was so cool because you'd hear the siren go off, and my mother would go and grab her helmet, put it on, grab her billy stick, and out the door she would go. And her job was to walk up and down the street and make sure the blackout shades really blacked out all the light from inside the house. And if my father wasn't home and I was home alone, I couldn't wait for her to get back because it was kind of scary. You hear that siren going off and you hear planes overhead. So, but it was interesting, and I was proud of her. And I still have her billy club. And the other thing I remember about World War II, I believe it was at that time frame, was rationing. I found some of my mom's ration books, and I think they used to ration sugar, maybe flour, but definitely butter. And it was really awful because it came in a plastic bag that you could see through. It looked like Crisco, but it had a little yellow pill in the middle, and you used to have to knead the bag and get that yellow pill all dispersed so that it actually looked like butter. Did it taste like butter? No.
Ugh.
It was absolutely horrid. But those are, I think, most of my memories from World War II. That's all I can remember because I was not that old.
So the 1960s was often associated with turmoil and unrest in the United States. How did some of these things affect you and your family and friends?
1960s? Mm-hmm. Are you talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Yep, like the Cuban missiles, Martin Luther King Jr.
Well, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, I was in Miami, Florida, finishing my nurses training. And President Kennedy had ordered troops to go down to the lowest part of the US, which was Key West. And I remember looking out of the hospital windows and seeing the convoys going down. Day after day after day, you would see the convoys. And being a Northerner, all I could think of was get out of the South and get back north. And I remember going to my director of nursing and asking her, could I take a leave of absence? I want to go up north. And she said, Joan, you are about 6 to 9 months from graduating from nursing school. Yes, you can have your leave of absence, but if you take one, don't come back. I didn't take a leave. I stayed there. It was scary, but we all got through it. And I was glad I could be part of it, actually.
So in the 1970s, there were things like women's rights and the environmental movement going on. Were you part of that in any way?
I was part, not exactly of the women's rights movement, but in the 70s, I co-founded Birthright of Pioneer Valley, and I was its first director. And Birthright was an international organization that was founded in Toronto, Canada. And it was to help women who chose not to abort their child, but needed help getting through the pregnancy. So Birthright provided pregnancy testing, counseling. We had homes throughout the whole country where we've had instances where young women were asked to leave their home, and we had Birthright shelter homes where they could go and stay. We offered, actually, there were doctors in the area that would give them free medical care and deliver their babies. And if they wanted to keep them, they were also counseled. Or if they wanted to place their babies for adoption, there was counseling available. But we, as Birthright workers, were actually more friends, somebody they could go to and talk to. And we knew the resources to get for them.
So who do you think of as the most important person in your life?
Well, it's interesting because it wasn't a relative, and she wasn't the most important person, but she gave me the most important advice that I ever had. Because being a young in the medical community, a young wife with children, I was often conflicted because friends would invite you to afternoon tea, or they would ask you to be part of an organization. And I always felt like I felt pulled between my children and my duties to the medical community. And I met Sandra Friccione. She was working with me in Birthright. She had 10 children. And I was telling her about being conflicted, and she said to me, Joan, the best advice I can ever give you is to always put family first. She said, if friends ask you to do something and you put your family first and they don't understand, then they're not really your friends, because your friends will understand how important family is.
So you had mentioned earlier that you were around during Martin Luther King and such and civil rights movement. Could you tell me a little more about that time and and in the 70s when the environmental movement was going?
Well, I wanted to tell you, first of all, I think about the civil rights movement because I was a person from the North and I went south for my nursing education. And I have to tell you, the Black people did not have any rights. They were not on the same, they were in the same hospital, but they were not on the same floor. They had their own floors. They had their own nursery for the Black babies. And as a white student nurse, I never had to care for a Black patient. That was part of the rules of our nurses training. And I found I was so embarrassed at how they treated the Black people. And I remember having delivered a Black baby one day, and taking her or him to the black nursery. I had to carry the child through the rain to another building to the black nursery. And before mothers were discharged, black or white, we had to give a baby bath demonstration, show them how to wash their babies. Well, we couldn't have just one. We had to have one in the black unit, and we had to have one in the white unit. And an eye-opener for me was I was making grand rounds with the orthopedic group, and this was a 1,500 bed hospital, so it was pretty big.
That's a lot.
And you had, the chief orthopedic surgeon, you had the residents, the chief residents, the interns, and I would follow them around and just listen. But when we got to the black orthopedic unit, they said to me, "You can go and take a break now and come back in an hour." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, we're going into the black unit now." And I said, "But why aren't I going there?" And they said, "Because you're white and you don't have to go." And I said, "But I want to." That was a big eye opener. You wonder why they had so many post-operative infections with the black people, because there was a bed, and then there was a bedside stand, and then there was another bed. They were just so crowded in there. So if somebody had an infection, it was very easy for the other patients to be infected. But and also, if you had a black baby born and the black nursery was full, it went into the white nursery in the back behind a screen. So if anybody asked, "Why is there a screen there?" you would tell them, "Oh, it's a baby that's sick and we're isolating it." We couldn't tell them that it was a black child.
Wow.
It was terrible. I mean, the
Yeah.
black and in our dorm we had maids, and of course they were all black. But our maid, my maid, her name was Maxie, and she was the most incredible woman you'd ever want to meet. She caught me coming in because, as I said before, rules are made to be broken. I never signed out. When I went out at night, I would just leave and stay out all night and come in the morning. And Maxie caught me one morning and she said,
Oh.
"Miss, where have you been?" I said, I hope you're not going to tell on me, Maxie." She said, "No, I'm not going to tell on you." But she said, "Don't stay out all night." She said, "You can always come to my house." And I was so overwhelmed. I said, "Maxie, you'd have me in your house?" And she said, "Well, my house is clean." And I said, No, I'm just so surprised that you would offer me, because I'm always breaking rules, Maxie, that you would take me into your house. And she had a very, very bright daughter who wanted to be a nurse.
Oh.
She couldn't even apply to Jackson Memorial Hospital because of the color of her skin. Now, if that doesn't embarrass people, it should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, more about the environmental movement. So, what can you tell me more about that time, like specifically the turtles?
The turtles. We lived in Florida for a brief time right on the beach. And I had the pleasure of meeting the turtle lady of Longboat Key. She was a turtle lady before there were even groups that watched out for turtles. She used to walk the beach every morning. And if a turtle had come up at night, you would see the trail from the ocean up to where she laid her eggs. And Frida used to mark the nest and the estimated time when the nest would hatch. And you used to go out and hopefully get the babies all into the ocean. If it was happening at sunset, you'd have to make sure the birds were all gone because they would come down and eat the little turtles. But the turtles and the birds and the turtles were getting in trouble because there were so many plastic bags in the ocean. So that's why I feel the environment needs attention. We need to be aware and get rid of the plastics and dispose of things properly. And especially those cans where you keep cans together, those little plastic rings that you see. I used to always cut mine up so that they wouldn't get around the necks of a bird or a turtle.
Yeah,
So I think it's
good.
important to educate people how to dispose of their things properly.
So, moving on to the reflection questions, who do you think was the most important person of your life?
Well, there were too many to mention, but the lady that I mentioned that gave me the good advice, I think she was one of the most important people because she gave me knowledge that I could pass on to my children about being family first.
Yeah. And like, what was the most happiest moment of your life?
There were too many. Of course, the birth of every child and watching them grow up, watching them graduate college, not especially high school, but college, and seeing my daughter graduate from law school and the other one graduate from Holy Cross and become a CPA. And our son graduated from Smith College School of Social Work. So it was really interesting and a very prideful moment to see your children graduate and continue to do well.
What was the like most important lesson that you learned in your life?
Actually, not to judge other people and to let live. People love who they love. If you have a mixed marriage, let people just do what they need to do to be happy.
What was your proudest moment?
I don't know.
That's all right.
There were too many.
Like, what was one of them, perhaps, like one that you really
Proudest
enjoyed?
or happiest?
Your proudest moment, really.
Actually, I think I was pretty proud walking down the aisle with that man I married.
Yeah.
It was amazing. I mean, we had a mixed marriage and we got married in the Catholic Church, and I was Jewish and he was Catholic. But walking down the aisle and coming back as a married couple, in spite of all the nonsense we went through with family, that was my proudest moment and my happiest moment, that we did what we wanted to do. And they said, well, he's Catholic, you're Jewish. He's Filipino, you're American. Your marriage is not going to last. This year we're coming up, I think, to number 55.
Congratulations.
So it worked. It more than worked.
Is there anything that we didn't get to that you'd like to talk about?
I think you did a marvelous job covering everything. Thank you.
How would you most like to be remembered?
I think as a kind and loving person and loving family and doing for your family.
All right. Joan, on behalf of the Rotary Club of West Springfield, I would like to thank you for joining us today for West Springfield Legacy Stories. I'm Andra Fleury, and thanks for tuning in.